Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have a great show for you today. As always, I'm Amber Duke back at the desk with both of you, Mom.
Good to be here.
And a happy Friday.
I know, and it's a wet, rainy Friday in the DMV. I know we need it, because it's been a scorcher. But man, I'm telling you, I was not looking forward to my weekend.
Yeah, could we have had the hot weather on the weekend and the rain during the week?
Yeah, yes, little switch.
Very unlucky. But also speaking of unlucky, President Trump held a big, beautiful event yesterday at the White House where he urged Congress to pass his budget bill with that July 4th deadline.
Here's part of what he said.
This is the ultimate codification of our agenda to, very simply, a phrase that's been used pretty well by me over the last 10 years, but maybe even before that, make America great again. Very simple, make America great again. I shouldn't say this, but we don't want to have grandstanders where one or two people raise their vote. We vote no, and they do it to grandstand, that's all. Not good people. They know who I'm talking about. I call them out, but we don't need grandstanders.
Meanwhile, some House Republicans are fuming over the Senate parliamentarians' decision to take an axe to certain Medicare measures.
Elizabeth McDonough, the Senate parliamentarian, ruled that the Senate's cap on healthcare provider taxes violates what's called the Byrd Rule. The Byrd Rule governs what bills can be passed with a simple majority and avoid a filibuster.
The cap would have sparked billions in savings to make up for Trump's tax cuts. McDonough also asked other key aspects of the bill related to education and regulations on gun suppressors and easily concealable firearms. Congressman Greg Steube wrote on X, "How is it that an unelected swamp bureaucrat who was appointed by Harry Reid over a decade ago gets to decide what can and cannot go in President Trump's one big, beautiful bill? It is time for our elected leaders to take back control. J.D. Vance should overrule the parliamentarian and let the will of the people, not some staffer hiding behind Senate procedure, determine the future of this country."
Democratic Senator Jeff Merkley praised the parliamentarian's ruling, writing in a statement, "Democrats are fighting back against Republicans' plans to gut Medicaid, dismantle the Affordable Care Act, and kick kids, veterans, seniors, and folks with disabilities off of their health insurance."
So obviously a big blow to the big, beautiful bill. And this July 4th deadline that the president set is looking more and more unlikely. Now, I don't think that they were necessarily going to meet that from the jump just because of how many concerns more fiscal conservative Republicans had about even the House version of the bill. But now that the Senate bill is getting gutted, it's going to be even harder when it gets back over to the other chamber for those individuals to get on board.
Yeah, I would agree. It's going to be difficult, right? And they're going to have to concede maybe on some of the sticking points that they have already talked about. I also think it's important to remind folks of the role of the Senate parliamentarian. Senate parliamentarian is nonpartisan. They interpret the rules. They are not there, every time you don't like something. And I think this is where we're getting into tricky waters. Let's get rid of this individual, right, who's there to really be the Senate's advisor. And so I think we're in tricky waters, big picture here. If we're telling the Senate parliamentarian every time we don't like something, your job is at stake. When that is your job, is to interpret the rules and then deliver. Hey, this is what I'm interpreting, and this is what you can and cannot do. And so I know that we can get back and forth into what's going to be in the bill, what isn't, and we'll know more as we get toward July 4th. But I also think that there's really a challenge here that they're facing if they're threatening every time they don't like something.
Yeah, and Senate Majority Leader John Thune made pretty clear that he's going to abide by the Senate parliamentarians' recommendations for the bill. Some of the rulings, though, were I thought, a little suspect. The Byrd Rule basically says that everything done through the reconciliation process has to relate directly to budget and spending issues. And some of these very clearly did, whether it was getting rid of Medicaid for non-citizens or getting rid of Medicaid coverage of things like sex changes for kids and some of the other provisions in the bill. The regulations on gun suppressors obviously is more able to be argued by the parliamentarian that that's not related to the budget. Some of these issues were. Several members of the Senate have since said that they are working on rewriting some of those provisions related to Medicaid and SNAP and other entitlement benefits in order to try to appease the Senate parliamentarian. But they have made clear that they're not planning on getting rid of her. It doesn't seem like Vance is going to step in and overrule her either, just based on what the majority leader has said publicly.
Right, and I do agree that it's likely not to happen, but I think that also putting the threat out there is also discouraging too. And it's setting precedent that we're just going to always go after the advisor, essentially, when we don't like something. But I agree that in the long run, more than likely, it's not going to happen and everyone's going to keep playing ball as they have. But I also think that there's going to be that issue with rural hospitals that will be impacted, that they're looking at right now. How much will rural hospitals be impacted based on state taxes, and getting into some of the nuances with Medicaid and how that process works. It will be interesting to see how folks who do have many rural communities within their jurisdictions vote on something like that, that could impact and even close down some rural hospitals that are very much needed, and what their constituents will have to say about that. So I don't think they're rushing on that point either.
Yeah, and look, there's been arguments that senators are happy to have the parliamentarians strip some of these provisions out of the bill because it prevents them from having to make a potentially politically tricky vote on some of these issues related to their constituents. And so maybe they don't want to fight back against the parliamentarian because it's sort of an easy way for them to get out of voting on some hard things. Jody Arrington, who is the chair of the House Budget Committee, also confirmed that Republicans are trying to rewrite some of the provisions before it comes back to the House. But yeah, this is obviously going to delay things quite a bit. One of the other interesting things that I think is worth mentioning as it relates to McDonough is she was appointed by Harry Reid in 2012. Mm-hmm. The following year...
the first woman to be in the position. Just want to insert that, by the way, folks.
Good for her.
Yeah.
And then the following year, in 2013, Harry Reid, of course, got rid of the filibuster for judicial appointments, which was against the advice of the person that he had appointed to the parliamentarian position. She was also a policy advisor to John Kerry for some time. And this is not the first time that she has come under fire, as I mentioned, the Harry Reid issue, but later on during the Biden administration with the Inflation Reduction Act, there were several provisions that she recommended stripping from the bill because they violated the Byrd Rule, and Democrats called on then Vice President Kamala Harris to overrule the parliamentarian, and Kamala Harris declined to do so. So this is obviously an issue on both sides of people getting frustrated with the Senate parliamentarian, but so far she's been in the role at this point for 13 years. The Republicans seem clear that they're not going to violate that tradition.
Yeah, and I think that's good, like, solid points, right? That this has not always been, we're not just talking about the Republican Party who's going after the parliamentarian. I do think, yeah, Democrats have done it too. That's why I think we have to be careful about, the threats and setting precedent, because it is the Senate's advisor. On a broader scope, what is at stake, do you think, if this does not go the way Trump plans? Because this is the bulk of his domestic agenda inside of this tax and spending package, or he calls it the big beautiful bill, right? But what's at stake here, do you think? I mean, politically.
Yeah, I mean, this is set to be the landmark legislation of his administration, of his presidency. If this doesn't get passed, he's in big trouble. He's done a lot of things through executive orders, which have been challenged in the courts, a lot of them still subject to nationwide injunctions. The best way to codify a lot of these policies is through legislation that goes through Congress. And whether it's stripping healthcare from illegal immigrants or stripping funding to Planned Parenthood, or a lot of this bill has to do with funding for border security and immigration policy, defunding sanctuary cities. That is a huge part of what he ran on. So if he's not able to get that done legislatively, that will be very damaging for his ability, one, in the midterms, and then two, whoever his successor is running in 2028, to make the case that his presidency was a successof one.
Yeah, I think that he will, for the sake of everything you just mentioned, he probably will push this July 4th deadline. Of course, he wants it on July 4th with, all of the significance the day holds and the holiday holds. But the chances of it passing at this point on July 4th, it's slim based on all the back and forth that we've seen just in the past even 48 hours. It feels like there's always something coming down. We will be talking about Congressman Massie, and he's one of the folks you heard in Trump's soundbite who's really been pushing back.
Grandstander.
Yeah, the grandstander.
Right.
So we'll be talking about that a little bit later in the show. Coming up next, though, President Trump thinks certain reporters from the New York Times and CNN should be fired. Is that new? Yeah, we've heard that story before, but it's happening again. More on that coming up. President Trump is having some sort of a meltdown, it seems. It all comes after CNN and the New York Times reported that the U.S.'s strikes on Iranian nuclear sites only set them back a few months. He took to Truth Social to call for those reporters to be canned, writing, "Fake news reporters from CNN and the New York Times should be fired immediately. Bad people with evil intentions." He's also threatening to sue both outlets. His attorney sent a letter demanding the reports be retracted. A CNN spokesperson says the network is rejecting the claims the report is false. The Times also responded, writing, "No retraction is needed. No apology will be forthcoming. We told the truth to the best of our ability. We will continue to do so. It all comes after White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt said the individual who leaked the reports to the press should be in jail.
Meanwhile, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth slammed Fox News reporter Jennifer Griffin during his press conference yesterday. Let's watch.
Do you have certainty that all the highly enriched uranium was inside the Fordo Mountain, or some of it, because there were satellite photos that showed more than a dozen trucks there 2 days in advance? Are you certain none of that highly enriched uranium was moved?
Of course, we're watching every single aspect, but Jennifer, you've been about the worst, the one who misrepresents the most intentionally. What the president says. I'm familiar.
Report about the ventilation shafts on Saturday night, and in fact, I was the first to describe the B-2 bombers, the refueling, the entire mission with great accuracy. So I take issue with that.
I appreciate you acknowledging that this was the first the most successful mission based on operational security that this department has done since you've been here, and I appreciate that.
Griffin is a longtime Pentagon press corps member. Fox's chief political analyst, Britt Hume, came to Griffin's defense, saying on the airways that she did not deserve to be attacked. And didn't they used to work together?
They did.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, I know some people internally at Fox who are not big fans of Jennifer Griffin, so I'm not super surprised to see Pete go after her there, the defense secretary. But this CNN and New York Times reporting was problematic because they did not include the full context regarding that intelligence report that they cited in their initial stories. They did not include, for example, that the report was issued with, quote, low confidence and that it was preliminary. They only added those statements after Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth indicated that that was the case during a press conference. So they were effectively forced to include that context and never apologized for not including that in the first place. And some of their anchors, in fact, including CNN's Kate Baldwin, claimed that it was always in the report that it was issued with low confidence. So I think that they've really bungled this.
You know, I would disagree, and I hear what you're saying, but they did mention CNN's reporting that this was an initial finding. And we know with reporters, oftentimes you're getting information sometimes where, in this case, it was likely leaked, and because it wasn't out yet, of course, right? So you're presenting it with some caution, saying this is initial findings, this is what we know right now. And that's what reporters do. We go after stories and we have sources, and often long-time sources. It's been vetted. And both CNN and the New York Times have come out saying that they stand by the reporting because they did mention it was initial findings. Trump himself was contradictory at one point, saying, more uncertain what was going on and what had happened, and then another time saying obliterated. So he himself has gone back and forth. What he's upset about is that it was leaked, and he wants the fear to be there for those who did leak the information. He wants to plant that seed of fear, and for the reporters as well.
Well, I think people who leak classified information or intelligence reports should be fearful. That is against the law. It's also against the duty that you swear to uphold when you go into the government.
Well, it happens all the time.
That doesn't mean it's acceptable, though. And look, if we're talking about what administration should do to leakers, we saw what the Obama administration did. They spied on reporters, including Fox News' James Rosen, to try to find out who was sharing information with him so that they could put those leakers in jail. That was the precedent set by the previous administration. So the idea that Trump is somehow out of bounds, as we suggested in this script, for indicating, or Karoline Leavitt rather, for indicating that people who leak classified information should be in jail, that is the standard that is upheld by the law.
Trump has repeatedly targeted media that he does not like what they have to say. So anything that does not go with his agenda, in this case, obliterated, Iran's nuclear sites. So because they didn't do exactly what he would have wanted them to say, had they done something differently and reported it the way he would like, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. We wouldn't even be having this conversation. And also, I think it's interesting that there were 3 reporters on that byline, and he targets 1.
Well, she has a history. Natasha Bertrand has a history of getting things wrong.
Okay, fair. Why isn't he upset with, if that's your case, I'm not going to go there because I don't know, why isn't he upset with the AP and ABC News, who also had similar reporting? Why isn't he upset with everyone? Why does he target one person out of the 3 bylines and the other 2 outlets? Just curious.
Yeah, Natasha Bertrand's an easy target because she has a history of getting things wrong. She was one of the individuals who was loudest on the Russian collusion narrative. And then ahead of the 2020 presidential election, she published the report at Politico of the 51 intelligence officials who claimed that the Hunter Biden laptop was the product of Russian disinformation, despite the fact that they had no actual direct evidence to suggest that that was the case. So she should have never published that report in the first place. A lot of people in the industry believe, and this is, a little bit of media insider baseball, that she has a lot of interesting sources in the CIA that basically leak classified information to her to push a certain narrative, not to report the truth, but in order to leak selective items to make certain individuals look a certain way. And look, the reality is that the assessments from the American intelligence apparatus, the Israeli intelligence apparatus, and Iran itself have all indicated that there was significant damage to these nuclear facilities that didn't set Iran back a few months, but years. So the problem is the reporting was initial, but when you get an initial intelligence finding, you're supposed to go verify that. If they had actually reached out to additional sources or talked to people within the intelligence community, they would have found that that report was rejected by other parts of the intelligence apparatus and that it was issued with low confidence, but they clearly didn't do that. They were more interested in rushing to get this report out to make the president and the military, frankly, look like they hadn't done their job.
Well, I'm not going to disagree with you that media rushes sometimes to put things out there. I think we all know that. Everyone wants to have the breaking news information. It is up to each individual media outlet to do the discernment, meaning every time you get a source and information gets to you, you don't automatically run with it. The fact that they also had 2 other reporters on the byline and that it's gone through certain processes would lead you to believe that they've done the vetting. You're not just putting out a quick tweet. Right? So they're a national news outlet that I know national news has messed up. I'm not saying it hasn't. But I think we have to also keep in mind that there are pieces of discernment that happens within the process within news. Not every piece of information that comes to you do you report, right? And they mentioned initial findings. That has happened all the time. President Trump himself releases things, even in his last term, initial findings. So I think that we oftentimes want to just target media when they don't do exactly as we want them to do. And this is an example, case in point, of Trump doing so.
Up next, are cell phones in schools a thing of the past? Well, one Democratic lawmaker wants that to be the case. More on that next. Michigan Democratic Senator Elissa Slotkin has called for a ban on cell phones in all K-12 classrooms in the country.
Take a listen to what she had to say in a speech yesterday.
But as we increase technology in schools, we also have to acknowledge where technology is already harming our kids. Too many students are lagging in the people and problem-solving skills that will be even more valuable in the future economy, and that's largely because of social media and cell phones. To that end, we should ban cell phones in every K-12 classroom in America.
Slotkin's comments have garnered a great deal of support, with Arizona Senator Mark Kelly posting on X, "Phones in school have been a disaster for learning and attention. Senator Slotkin is right. It's time to do right by our kids and get phones out of classrooms."
Slotkin's remarks come just a week after she and Indiana Republican Senator Jim Banks introduced legislation to ban cell phones in schools for children of U.S. military members.
Maybe we'll agree on this one.
I know, right?
I think this is a great idea. I really do. I mean, we have seen the damage of excessive cell phone use with young kids, attention span disorders, leading to mental health issues, particularly among young women. There should be no place for phones in the classroom. A lot of schools have already introduced these RFID blocking cases that students put their phones in at the beginning of the school day and they don't get them back until the final bell rings. And they've reported a huge increase in successful classroom management, of kids actually paying attention in the classroom, performing better on tests, being more social with one another in the lunchroom. Look, I don't agree with Senator Slotkin on much, but on this one, she's got my support.
Yeah, in even thinking about this and thinking about raising a child in this atmosphere right now, where people have given their kids cell phones at age 8, right? And you're just like, wait, will I do that? And I find myself asking myself these questions and wondering what is the best policy. She says in classrooms. So I wonder, does that mean they can still have them in the school, in their lockers? So when they get out of school, if they need to call their mom to pick them up and she's running late, you can still have access to it? Are we banning it, in the school period? So I wonder, but it sounds like it's just classrooms from what we could gather. And I do think that it's a good idea based on everything you mentioned. So I'm in full agreement. I think, playing devil's advocate, what other things come as I was researching this is that some research, there's a trade-off that students likely feel safer having access to their phone if they're facing any bullying or harassment. And the phone feels safer because they can audio record and have proof that this is happening to them. And so that piece, I thought, that's interesting. That's maybe not in the classroom needed, but maybe during lunchtime, maybe during activity time, there is a cell phone there. I don't know. I mean, I think there's a safety component that I just think we also have to look at. Is there a trade-off happening psychologically to students who do feel safer, who are often being bullied? And we're seeing bullying happening more and more. That's no secret, and it's out there, right? So I don't know what your take would be on that, but that would be the only thing for me that I wonder. And also with, sadly to say, the number of school shootings, how many kids have been able to call 911 because they had their phone near them, or call their parent. And we've seen, parents do all kinds of things, rush in, get to the scene faster, notify police. So there's that element of safety that I do wonder about. So maybe it could be in their lockers, but not in the classroom.
Yeah, I think my pushback to those arguments would be that there's a lot of cyberbullying as well that happens with young people nowadays, especially on social media. So whatever trade-off you might get from being able to record an in-person bully, you also have to consider that a lot of the bullying is happening online. And on the school shooting point, there's been cases where students' phones have alerted the shooter to their location because maybe their parents tried to call them back, etc., or they were jamming 911 lines because so many people were trying to call. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of trade-offs involved. And sure, I mean, I think you're right that having a phone after school, at the school but not in the classroom, is a reasonable trade-off as well. I mean, I remember being a student athlete. You go to practice after school, and sometimes your practice ends early, or you have to stay late.
About that flip phone back in the day.
Yeah, that's right. Calling my mom on my razor. Practice got out 30 minutes early today. Can you come pick me up? So yeah, it's good to be able to get in touch with your parents within reason, right? Like a lot of parents that have been cited in reports in places like the New York Times have actually been arguing against phone bans in schools because they like to text their kids all day long.
I believe that.
And the kids are like, I have to text my mom.
Stalk our parents.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it's
I'm
crazy.
like, what are you doing?
Right. There is something to be said for parents who just go over the top.
Let's get some independence for these kiddos.
Yes, seriously. I pray that will not be me. Maybe I'm speaking too soon, but we'll see.
Next up, President Trump and a lobbying organization are going full speed ahead, trying to oust Thomas Massie from his House seat. That's next.
Well, the rift between Congressman Thomas Massie and President Trump is getting much more serious.
Indeed. In exclusive reporting from the Daily Caller, a source said that AIPAC was going after Thomas Massie. AIPAC is a lobbying group that advocates for a strong Israeli-U.S. relationship. And Thomas Massie confirmed that report, saying in an exclusive statement, "I'm aware that foreign lobbyists have conducted a push poll and are trying to recruit another candidate to run against me due to my opposition to foreign and forever wars," Massie said. Their previous efforts have failed completely, and I expect this race to be no different.
Trump himself launched a MAGA PAC to help the effort to boot the Kentucky congressman. The PAC released an ad yesterday. Let's take a look here.
What happened to Thomas Massie? President Trump is banning sex changes on minors. Massie voted against it. President Trump is cutting taxes and saving Kentucky families $10,000. Massie voted against it. President Trump is securing our border and deporting criminal aliens. Massie voted against Trump again. And after Trump obliterated Iran's nuclear weapons program, Massie sided with Democrats and the Ayatollah. Let's fire Thomas Massie. MAGA Kentucky is responsible for the content of this advertising.
The president recently wrote a lengthy Truth Social post going off on Massie, saying in part, Congressman Thomas Massie of Kentucky is not MAGA, even though he likes to say he is. Actually, MAGA doesn't want him, doesn't know him, and doesn't respect him. He is a negative force who almost always votes no, no matter how good something may be.
Massie seems to be taking this head on, and with a touch of humor, he told reporters on Tuesday, in 2020, I got my Trump antibodies from a natural infection when he came after me and I survived. It will deplete his political capital if he doesn't succeed. And he knows that, so that's got to be part of his calculus. He's right about that last sentence, I will tell you. I think that if he does not succeed and, pours money into this in Kentucky, into that race, I think that it's going to be detrimental to Trump. Also because it's going to tell those who do stand up against Trump, hey, guess what? You may not have anything to worry about.
That's right, and I followed up this Daily Caller report with an exclusive interview with Thomas Massie yesterday. We spoke for about 35 minutes, and that was a point that he continued to make, both about Trump and AIPAC. And he pointed out that he does polling in his district every year, and he's found that support for foreign aid and weapons to Israel has gone down every single year among his constituents, and yet AIPAC still has a really tight grip on Congress. So his point is, if AIPAC is working hard to field a primary challenger to run against me and they fail again, other members of Congress are going to see that these are empty threats, that we don't need to capitulate to AIPAC, or in this case to Trump as well, in order to get reelected. And one of the interesting things about AIPAC's fielding of primary challengers against Massie is, one, they haven't had much luck finding someone who wants to run against him, but a lot of the people that they've contacted are then calling Thomas Massie to tell him that AIPAC came and asked me to run against you, and just to let you know, I'm not going to do it. So I'm curious as to who this magic candidate they're going to find in Kentucky might be. It'll probably be a state senator or something of the like. And look, Thomas Massie has survived numerous primary challenges, and every single time he has won by more than 70%.
And let's take a look, just to put this in context, what happened when Elon Musk and groups that he supported dumped a whole bunch of money, $21 million, into the race in Wisconsin for the Supreme Court.
Right.
And guess what happened? That was a huge blow, all that money, and you still didn't win. And, the Republicans, some of them brushed it off, but there's a lot of fear there, that money may not do it. So even with Trump saying this and going after Congressman Massie, I think Congressman Massie has a serious point here. He's a 6-term congressman. He's standing by the values of his constituents. Trump said, and as he points out, he ran on, as he points out with Trump, staying out of war. And so I think his constituents, and having lived and worked in the South, really believe in value-based things where you do what you say you're going to do. And they value that very much, and he does that. He is sticking by what his constituents want. There's something to be said for that.
Yeah, and look, Kentuckians, at least the ones I've talked to, I'm married to a former Kentuckian born in Southern Illinois, raised in Kentucky, and they are very concerned about how much money is going abroad, and they feel like they're not seeing the impacts of domestic spending in their state, and that they've really been left behind by Congress. So Thomas Massie taking this tack on the Israel-Iran war, I think, is something that resonates with those people in his district. And he's also talked about his concerns about the big, beautiful bill. He feels like it doesn't cut enough spending to offset the extension of the Trump tax cuts. He's worried that the Senate is now looking to draw down the green energy tax credits over time as opposed to eliminating them immediately. And he's pointed out that some members of Congress who are more fiscal hawks are interested in perhaps separating this into 2 smaller, beautiful bills, including one that focuses on the tax cut extension and entitlement spending, and a separate one that includes more things related to the president's immigration policies.
Because it's more likely to pass that way is what he's probably thinking, right?
And he's thinking that they can get more spending cuts if they do it that way as well. And he points out, look, and I think this is an important point when it comes to the deficit, which is that the CBO scores these bills for a period of 10 years. But as he points out, some of the tax provisions, including the no tax on tips, the senior tax reform, and the no tax on they didn't do Social Security, but there was a third one. No tax on overtime.
Overtime, yeah.
Yeah, he points out that those actually expire after 3 or 4 years. So basically, you're adding to the deficit for the first 3 or 4 years, but then because the taxes expire, which of course they're not going to let them expire because that would be politically damaging for anyone to vote against extending them, the following 6 years, you then make that up in the deficit. So when CBO scores the bill over 10 years, you get the full version of the taxes expiring. They're not going to expire. So he's looking at the 3 to 4 year period with the impact that those taxes, the lack of taxes, will have. So I mean, I think that's a reasonable way of looking at it, because look at what happened with the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. They deliberately made the portion of the middle class tax cuts, as opposed to the business tax cuts, temporary, so that it would be subject to the extension that they're trying to do this year. They did that deliberately because they knew no one's going to vote against extending a middle-class tax cut, but we can balance the budget by saying that it's only a 5-10-year provision.
Well, right, and we've seen that happen before, where they put time limits on it just to make sure that it passes, we can move forward, and Americans are not worried about it. I'm curious, because you interviewed him yesterday, what was your biggest takeaway? Any surprises from that 35-minute interview where you really got to understand his point of view on this and how he's feeling about President Trump coming after him?
Honestly, he had a really good sense of humor about it. He didn't seem particularly bothered by it. He didn't seem concerned at the primary challenge. He pointed out that he's been getting a lot of behind-the-scenes support from fellow Republicans who have been giving him fist bumps in the hallway or telling him to keep going. And he has asked his friends on the Hill to get checks from their campaigns to dump into his war coffers to help him fund his re-election campaign. Yeah. He said not a single Republican has turned down that request yet. They are all helping him with money. And his donations from constituents have gone up every time the president attacks him. $30,000 the first time, $70,000 the second time. This time, over $100,000 in donations. His quote to me when I asked him about his concerns about this primary challenge were, quote, "I'll be ready."
Yeah, and I think that what he knows is how detrimental, I go back to that, this will be if Trump starts to do a spending spree and does not win. It's going to be detrimental. It's going to really send a message. So he's getting those fist bumps. Those fist bumps will go, even further, and there's going to be more of them if Trump is not successful in this. So I think Trump has to really weigh this. I mean, I understand that he's one of two going against the tax and spending package, but he has to realize that, like you said, he may have to break up that bill in order for it to pass, and then he has to realize that there's a lot of clout being a 6-term congressman. And his constituents are tapping into something that they're into, the values of not going to war, of not putting money into foreign aid right now. I mean, these are all things that, whether I agree or disagree, Congressman Massie has stayed very true with. And again, I think that loyalist punch is something that's really, that's something that's going to stick with them. And they're going to, and I also think that they also like the idea of he's fighting for us and what we voted for him for. So I think that he's going to get more money than people will even imagine. Yeah,
look, he's a principled guy. He's also pointed out in regards to the timing of the big, beautiful bill, he's like, it's not going to get passed by July 4th, and they're going to threaten to hold us over the holiday to try to get it done, but they're probably going to backtrack on that.
There's going to be lawmakers on their boat.
And then he thinks that they're going to threaten to get rid of the August recess as well, but they won't end up doing it. He was like, that was a favorite trick of John Boehner's. He would threaten to take our recess, and he'd usually give us the week back. So, but he does think that maybe mid-August is a more realistic timeline.
And maybe if it's broken up, to your point.
Right.
Just got to be honest.
Up next, Melania Trump's elite Einstein Visa is back in the spotlight. We'll tell you more after this. The math ain't mathin', says Texas Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett.
In a House hearing Wednesday, Crockett questioned First Lady Melania Trump's reported EB-1 visa, also called an Einstein Visa. In 2001, Melania received her green card via the elite EB-1 program. Let's watch.
Melania, the First Lady, a model. And when I say model, I'm not talking about Tyra Banks, Cindy Crawford, or Naomi Campbell level, applied for and was given an EB-1 visa. And that stands for is an Einstein Visa. Now, y'all that don't know, let me tell you how you receive an Einstein Visa. You're supposed to have some sort of significant achievement, like being awarded a Nobel Peace Prize or a Pulitzer, being an Olympic medalist, or having other sustained extraordinary abilities and success in sciences, arts, education, business, or athletics. Last time I checked, the First Lady had none of those accolades under her belt. It doesn't take an Einstein to see that the math ain't mathin' here.
Republican Congressman from Texas, Lance Gooden, ripped Crockett, writing on X in part, First Lady Melania Trump came to the U.S. the right way, and Democrats are attacking her for it. Yet they ignored the 4-year illegal alien invasion created by Joe Biden's open borders.
Crockett slammed the Trump administration for its immigration crackdown and assault on immigrants who are on valid visas. Take a look at this.
Trump and my Republican colleagues want to restore integrity and security in the visa process is actually a joke. Let me be clear. Integrity is not snatching lawful visa holders off the streets and throwing them into unmarked vans. Integrity is not revoking visas based on social media posts that hurt somebody's little feelings because kids decide that they want to go after Trump or this administration. We have a thing called free speech in this country.
Well, I think what she was referring to right there, to catch up some of our viewers, because she did go on a different note right there at the tail end, was really because they are now looking, apparently, the Trump administration, at social media in the vetting process. And so she's bringing that up because it could, of course, impact actions taken due to political speech.
Yeah, which I think is reasonable. I mean, we decide who we want to let into this country. If you are on social media, either expressing support for terrorist organizations or doing things that run counter to American values, I think that should be considered in the vetting process. I mean, frankly, our vetting process for a long time has not done specific vetting on ideology, which has led to a lot of people coming to this country that hold views that are counter to American values. So that should be part of the visa process, in my opinion. I mean, one of the issues with the individual who was recently released by a judge, Mahmoud Khalil, was that he had lied on his visa application about being in a boycott, divestment, pro-Palestinian and functionally pro-Hamas group. And when you lie on a visa application about your involvement in certain political groups, that is grounds for stripping of a visa. And if they had looked at his social media, they may have seen that he was in that group and been able to deny him in the first place.
So if we go with that point, so what about, to counter that, what about the impact of just freedom of speech, being able to say what you want to say, one, and then two, isn't it subjective? So let's say this administration, let's say it's a Democratic president next time. Well, then are they going to say, well, this person is not going with what we want? Like, it's very subjective to start going down that lane. I think it's dicey.
Yeah, it is subjective. I mean, on the free speech point, you're not guaranteed the right to free speech if you are trying to immigrate to the United States. That is something that applies.
No, but it's part of our American values.
Here. Yeah, I mean, culturally, but legally, they don't have to guarantee free speech to people who are applying for visas. And then on the second point that you made, sorry, can you remind me?
Yeah, the subjective.
Oh, the subjective need. Yeah, I mean,
because
look,
another president.
It is subjective. I mean, under the Biden administration, for example, they granted parole status to a lot of people from Latin American countries who they claimed should be granted parole status because they had effectively political asylum because they were fleeing countries that had a high level of violence there. And that was a subjective determination based on what Biden thought that those people deserved. And Trump has subjectively decided that they don't get that. So that's obviously part of immigration
enforcement. The social media piece is getting to another layer, wouldn't you agree?
Not necessarily. We should probably talk about the Melania Visa as well, the Einstein Visa.
I know. We're going to get to that.
I know. We're eating up all the time on the other point.
Okay, well, let's jump to Melania.
Yeah.
Let's jump to Melania. It's a Friday, folks, so we're going to jump around. All right, so back to Melania. Look, I think what she's pointing out, one, this is not a new story. This is not a new story.
Right. People have been bringing this up about Melania for a long time.
Yeah. Washington Post has reported on this back several years ago, I believe it was. I think what she's trying to point out here, as the immigration policies right now are under fire and under scrutiny, is the inequity that someone who was, I think, dating Trump at that time, Melania Trump, or they were in a serious relationship, something of that nature, gets this seemingly pass. She was one of 5 people at that time from Slovenia who actually were granted the EB-1 visa. And she does not have, I would agree with Jasmine Crockett, she does not have any Einstein nature qualities or talents that would put her underneath that program.
So the EB-1 visa does have the Einstein statute in it, but it also has other statutes as well. So you can get the EB-1 visa either through a one-time major international achievement, like a Nobel Prize, for example, but you can also get it by meeting 3 out of 10 specific criteria, including nationally/internationally recognized awards, high salary relative to others in the field, membership in distinguished associations, leading roles in distinguished organizations, or published material about their work. And there's an arts category that explicitly includes modeling, and extraordinary ability means being one of the small percentage who have risen to the very top of their field. She was a supermodel who had worked with very well-known photographers who had graced the covers of numerous fashion magazines, was demanding a very high rate to her work. So I think it's inarguable that she qualified for that arts category in the modeling.
Yeah, I would disagree on that, and we could probably go back and forth on what we consider extraordinary. And I'm aware of all of that list, but I think, was she extraordinary, a supermodel who was extraordinary? I don't know about that one. Just saying.
She was making a lot of money. I don't know.
I'm just saying, well, really, we don't know how much she was making, because, that's her private business. We don't know how much. We just know that her profile got significantly higher when she started dating Trump, who was extremely popular across the spectrum back then, you know, and wasn't involved in politics yet. But you're talking about a very wealthy man who had a great amount of influence, and you happen to be dating him. I mean, we just look at the math ain't math. You just happen to be dating him, and you get this EB1. I don't know. I don't know if the math is mathin', because I don't think other people get that same opportunity, but that's just me. Yeah. All right.
I'll let you have the last word.
Okay, all right. Next up, protesters have chased Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sanchez out of their original wedding destination.
Is it the wedding of the century? Well, that's what some are calling the highly anticipated nuptials of billionaire Jeff Bezos and journalist turned philanthropist Lauren Sanchez. The happy couple arrived in Venice, Italy Wednesday for a start to the star-studded 3-day event. Some 200 A-list celebrities trickled in. The Kardashians, Oprah, Ivanka Trump, Usher, and others touched down in Venice, where wedding bells will soon be ringing. According to reports, nearly 100 private jets are flying in guests to attend the $20 to $50 million affair.
While the creme de la creme swamp Venice, Venetians aren't having it. No, they are not happy, many of them. Over the last few days, protesters mounted so-called "No Space for Bezos." Demonstrators put, as you see that sign there, a giant banner in St. Mark's Square reading, quote, "If you can rent Venice for your wedding, you can pay more tax." Activists floated a mannequin of Bezos holding on to an Amazon down the Grand Canal. They were pretty creative. Dummies of he and wife-to-be Sanchez were propped on gondolas. Anti-Bezos effort appears to have succeeded. The wedding will now be held on the outskirts of Venice. Now, Jezebel posted on X, quote, "The No Space for Bezos movement is the only good thing about the Bezos wedding. Have I got news for you?" X account posted, quote, "Jeff Bezos has told wedding guests not to bring a gift, with people asking, what do you give the man who has everything? A tax bill would be a good start." Bernie Sanders, of course, chiming in here, posting, quote, "This is oligarchy. This is obscene. While 60% live paycheck to paycheck and kids go hungry, Jeff Bezos, worth $230 billion, goes to Venice on his $500 million yacht for a $20 million wedding and spends $5 million on a ring, while his real tax rate is just 1.1%. And this oligarchy." So there's, of course, some people are going to say, well, that's his money.
That's how I feel.
Yeah, on that piece,
Yeah.
I'll say, okay, see, Sanders had a point until he starts to go into his money. I hear him on the taxes, but that's his money. I mean,
yeah, and I'm no Jeff Bezos fan. Amazon is basically like a sweatshop for Chinese goods. So that, I mean, it's a nightmare. But it looked very convenient, great platform. But I think it does a lot of harm to American small businesses. But that being said, it is his money. It's his wedding. I don't like the bitterness towards people who are having an opulent wedding just because some people don't like the aesthetic of it or the way that it looks from the outside. I think he's allowed to do whatever he and his wife want. And look, I would love to have an opulent Venice wedding. I'm sure it would be great. I obviously can't afford it. He can. All the best to them.
well, I think it's more about him as a whole, because there are others like George Clooney who have gotten married there. Many celebrities get married there, and there was a lot of positivity. People were excited to have, his wedding there. So this is more than about wealth. I think it's about the way Jeff Bezos has operated as a multi-billionaire. He's gotten involved with politics. He bought the Washington Post, then spiked endorsements, for Kamala Harris at the time. He supported Trump's campaign through Amazon, $1 million, and then ends up with a $2.3 billion something contract through Blue Origin. So the way he plays the game, I think people are not, and by the game, I mean the way he's operating his wealth and how he gets it. I think that's what people are looking at. We don't like you, Jeff Bezos, and I think he has to be prepared for that. And I don't have feelings for him. I'm not getting into my feelings. I'm saying I think that's what people are looking at, is him and how he has operated and maneuvered, especially with the media control and also in Europe. There's tax disputes with European governments. So the way he has operated is what people are frowning upon, I think, more than anything.
Yeah, I get the complaints about the business aspect. I do think on the politics question, it does feel a little one-sided. And just to clarify, the million he gave was to the inaugural committee, not to the campaign. But that being said, he has tacitly supported Trump. He appeared at the inauguration.
Right,
that's all
right,
true.
right.
But I mean, to the George Clooney point, right? Like, he's donated tons of money to Democrats, and he didn't get protests because they agreed with his political opinions. So it just feels a little bit manufactured to me. Like, is it really about them being mad he doesn't pay taxes, or are they just trying to stick it to the guy who's supporting
both.
Republicans?
Yeah, I'm sure both.
And I mean, the other part of this is that this is obviously a huge boon to the Venetian economy, right? There's a lot of people going to be hired to work this wedding who are probably getting pretty decent rates, unless he underpays them like he does his Amazon employees. And they're going to be spending a ton of money on catering, on alcohol, on the setup of this event, all of the the flowers, everything. So that's a huge injection of money into their economy, which I think is a good thing for them. They obviously have a lot of tourist money in general that they get. This is just on top of that. So I think, what bothers me about this is really the tone that people are taking about trying to essentially rain on this man's parade, which is supposed to be the happiest day of their life. And I'm pro-wedding. I like weddings.
Yeah.
I like marriage.
Well, right. And I think that he has to be prepared when he entered into more of the political, as you said, being near Trump's orbit and visually us seeing him. And then, yes, you're right, it wasn't him directly, but it was, Amazon donated $1 million to Trump's inaugural fund. All of these things, he has to be prepared that there may be backlash. And you can't predict where that backlash is going to come and who's going to do it. It just happens to be at your wedding, so.
Yeah, that's the part that bothers me. Let the man have his wedding. I don't know. I think he deserves to have a nice day. Everybody
look,
does.
When you get your wedding in Venice, let me know. I'll be there.
Unfortunately not. It was in Alexandria, Virginia, but we had a great time nonetheless. And that's actually going to do it for us on Rising Live. Look out for more exclusive YouTube content coming your way today. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hills YouTube channel so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. We'll see you next week.
10-year wedding? 10-year anniversary?
Coming up on 2.